actually mentioned a lot of things. You've talked about the issue of drought and how it causes displacement. You've talked about the issue of the climate crisis and also the new energy transition system and also how it's causing so much damage. And obviously, the amazing campaign you're doing with the drop the weapon and pick the pen, among so many other things. So thank you so much, Ilwan, for that keynote. And she's actually also elaborated a lot more on how or who controls resources nowadays, who controls land, and even who controls people. She briefly touched about the issue of multilateralism, but we're seeing how the multilateral system is no longer using soft power. We are leaving the system that we've always known, diplomacy, dialogue, and peace, and we're now moving a lot more towards hard power, where countries are using violence, they're using force, and they're using military equipment to really intimidate people, and that is not really the way forward. So as we move on into the discussion, I would definitely love to hear from the audience, and that is why when we have the panel, I'll open the floor for a few questions from the audience. So in all of this and everything that we've had already from Ilwan, these are not separate crises. In Gaza, in the DRC, in Ukraine, Somalia, etc. These are one system expressing itself differently across different geographies, but they are all rooted in the same logic. That power continue to decide whose land is expandable, whose land is extractive, and whose life is worth preserving, and whose life is worth taking. So I would like to introduce our panelists to join us on stage. We start by having two individuals. A scientist in Bethlehem who studies biodiversity under military occupation, and a Palestinian researcher who transformed the rubble of destruction into acts of cultural memory. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh and Ranim Daraghmeh. Please join me on stage. Thank you so much, Prof. And thank you so much, Ranim, for joining us today. We have Professor Mazin. He is the founder and volunteer director at the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at the Bethlehem University. Prof, you have also been an author of 250 scientific papers and over 30 book chapters spanning biodiversity, genetics, human rights, and popular resistance. In 2025, you were also a Nobel Peace Prize nominee for the work that you do. And Ranim, you are a Palestinian researcher. You are a cultural practitioner. You are an entrepreneur. You are also founder of Citrine Peers, a sustainability initiative that is transforming construction waste and geographical materials into design objects that carry environmental, material history, and cultural heritage. I will start with you, Prof. You have spent decades doing environmental science in Palestine while living under occupation. You study butterfly biodiversity, the living systems of a land that is being systematically destroyed. 80% of Gaza's total cropland has been destroyed, while 77.8% of that land is now inaccessible to farmers. What does it mean to be a scientist watching this happen to the land that you have dedicated your life to studying? And what does this ecological destruction tell us about the colonial logic that underlies it?
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you all. Thank you for attending this session. So as mentioned, I'm working in biodiversity, both research, conservation, education, community service. This is my childhood dream from when I was 6, 7 years old. I knew I was going to be a biologist because I had an uncle who loved to take me with him to nature. He was the first Palestinian zoologist. And so I learned to love nature. And nature, of course, is under assault globally, not just in Palestine. With climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, invasive species, overexploitation, and so on. There's also wars and climate change, as you heard from our keynote speaker, that these things are connected. We're all connected. We have this one beautiful planet that we are sharing. So from my childhood, I wanted to work on nature, conservation. And there's no difference, by the way, if you are working for nature for biological diversity or you're working for human diversity. They're all interconnected. So my interest is in preserving biological diversity and human diversity. Colonialism does the opposite of that. For example, the colonialists in what became known as Australia or what became known as the United States, how much virgin forests they left. The same thing in our country. In our country, part of the Fertile Crescent, and it's called the Fertile Crescent for a good reason, was very fertile. That's where humans first developed agriculture, where we first domesticated plants and animals. In this area, it was devastated by colonialism. Colonialists uprooted millions of trees. The Zionist colonizers also dried up the wetlands of the Hula area, also diverted the Jordan River basin from Lake Tiberias to the west, drying up the Jordan River, which used to flow at 1,360 million cubic meters per year, now at only 20 million cubic meters per year. You can see why this gives us the passion, the energy to basically work on these issues, because as I said, you know, what the colonizers want is one thing, and what we, the indigenous people, want is the complete opposite of that. We want sustainable human and natural communities. That's why my wife and I left six-figure incomes in the US, came back to Palestine for a zero-figure income, and we set up this Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, PalestineNature.org if you want to look it up. And we work to sustain human and natural communities. This is what gives us the passion. 70 or 80% of our work is volunteer work, like my work and my wife's work. So we encourage you, if you want to volunteer with us, whether locally or remotely, we welcome volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Mazin. You definitely mentioned something very important, that nature is actually under attack. And this is not just in Palestine. It's actually all over the world. And you know, the fact that you had to set up an institution, and I think you forgot to mention this to the audience, that you volunteer in this institution you set up 7 days a week. Every single day, you're volunteering your time and your knowledge to this institution to support biodiversity. So I will come back to you, Professor, and I just jump quickly to Ranim. Ranim, your practice with the Citrine PS actually takes construction waste and geological materials and transform them into design objects that carry environmental history and cultural memory. So right now, Gaza has over 60 million tons of that rubble, according to Al Jazeera. And Sudan has an agricultural infrastructure that has been deliberately dismantled. And the DRC has forests been lost to a conflict driven in large part by global demand for the minerals that power our so-called green energy transition, as actually mentioned by Ilman. Your work at this intersection of knowledge, culture, and crisis. So I really wanted to understand, what are we losing beyond the physical aspect of it? What happens to our community's identity, its memory, its future when the land itself is erased?
Thank you, Fatou, for this question, and thank you for inviting me. It's good to hear that those discussions are back into the climate circle. I think what stands out most in what you said is that today we often gravitate towards what's visible. The destruction, the rubble, the scale, the numbers, this is often the focus, but what's harder to see and much harder to rebuild is everything that gives it meaning. We lose sense of what space is used for. We lose sense of what lives have been lived through these spaces. And when we talk about debris, for example, it's usually framed as waste. But in reality, it's not neutral material. It's homes, it's archives, it's memories, and it's infrastructures of everyday life. And similarly, when the Food and Agriculture Organization highlights damage to agricultural land in Sudan, this is often framed in terms of food systems or economic loss. But what's being lost is a knowledge system. A knowledge system often being framed as alternative to the hegemonic, to the universal, to the well-known, to the easier side. Now, because relationships to land are not just functional, they're epistemic. They include farming practices, seasonal rhythms, ways of reading the environment, intergenerational knowledge transmission. And what happens when you lose the physical structure is that you lose all this practice, you lose the meaning behind it. This is not a dollhouse we're living in. These places have been built based on these practices and these lives and these identities. And very often, these forms of knowledge are treated as informal, traditional, or in contrast to the dominant universalized frameworks of knowledge that we just mentioned, which means they're already undervalued, if not actively discarded, before destruction even happens. Now, beyond that, land is also lived daily. It's how people gather, how people move, and so place is not passive, it actively forms identity. And when that space is altered or erased, identity doesn't just adapt, it's disrupted and reshaped under pressure. When you look across different contexts, this isn't incidental, it's patterned, and the disruption of land is often a disruption, again, of continuity. Now, this is where we can begin to understand that this is not just as destruction, but a form of structural violence, where harm is not just immediate or taken in momentum. This is actually when harm is being embedded in systems that actually erode relationships, knowledge, and agency. Which raises a critical question for a hot topic today, reconstruction. Because if rebuilding only focuses on the physical infrastructure without restoring these relationships to land and knowledge, then we risk reproducing the same hierarchies that marginalize these systems in the first place. So what's at stake is not just what is rebuilt, but whether the knowledge and relationships tied to land are recognized as central to this process.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ranim. You know, you really touch on a span of different issues. And, you know, you shared that mostly we see debris as waste. But it goes beyond that. It's about archives, it's about lives, and it's about knowledge. And, I mean, knowledge systems that are actually lost along the way. And, you know, the disruption of land is in itself the disruption of continuity. So this is something that is really crucial that you have mentioned. And I will go back to you, Prof. Prof, you were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2025, in part as a recognition that science itself can be an act of resistance. You have kept documenting, you have kept naming, you have kept counting, even as the destructions actually accelerate. And the international response has been, to put it plainly, inadequate. We all know that, right? What sustained that commitment that you have actually had over the years? And what do you want this room, a change now, to understand what accountability actually requires?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. I think the audience here already are doing great things in their own sphere of things. And we all are doing our best to combat genocide, ecocide, scholasticide, destruction of our educational system, medicide, destruction of the medical services, veriticide, destruction of the truth, basically. We're all doing our best collectively to challenge these things. Now, what sustains us in doing this? One is we know that it's an existential struggle. I don't need to tell anybody here that the earth is ailing, that we are this close to nuclear war or destruction by climate change. So it is an existential struggle, and it's for our children and grandchildren to survive on this planet. As a scientist, if I'm just researching nature, that's not good enough. I have to be involved in people's lives and in nature's lives, because we as human beings are part of nature. And so the institute that I work in, when we gathered in our first meeting with the volunteers, excuse me, we agreed to a motto for the institution. The motto is respect. First, respect for ourselves, that we as indigenous people can change our own circumstances. Second is respect for fellow human beings, regardless of their religion or background or culture or politics. Third, respect for nature, respect for the animals, the plants, the rivers, the mountains of this Mother Earth. That's what we have to do as human beings, is develop these levels of respect so that we are deserving of being called human beings. If we are not, we are going to go extinct, and we are very, very close to that. We are in danger as a species, as a civilization. And Palestine, the reason Palestine is important, by the way, and I think that's part of the reason why they invite people like Ranim and me to speak, is because Palestine exposes the hypocrisy of Western so-called civilization. Thank you. And this hypocrisy, when they talk about democracy and human rights and sustainability and COP21, COP24, COP25, Conference of Parties on Climate Change, and as Greta Thunberg said, they keep going blah, 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 blah. We are not into blah, blah. We are the people who should change, should take our destiny in our own hands and push for the change that we want to see in this world. And the volunteers I work with, all of them are young people. I'm the oldest guy. All of them are between 18 and 35 years old. They work out of a passion to change society. Like Ranim is changing society in her sphere of things in Ramallah. I'm in Bethlehem. I invite you to come and be part of this change, if you like. You can also work with us remotely, if you like. But this, you can see I have a passion for this change because I believe there's no other choice for us. There's no other choice. I mean, look what's happening with Iran now. And this is not a winnable war when you have nutcases like Trump and Netanyahu leading us to a global war where there's no winners. Only winners, by the way, might be cockroaches. Cockroaches are resistant to radiation, and they'll be feeding off of our dead bodies, by the way. So we have to work, we have to change.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Prof. Indeed, we really have to work, and we definitely have to change. And the pillars that you mentioned about your work, that respect for self is quite important in indigenous knowledge, and respect for other humans. And I think that is something that's crucial, because we are losing the respect for other humans, and we are losing the respect for nature. And the fact that you are working on these three principles or pillars is something that is crucial, and is something that we really need to discuss more and have more people work on this. And now I come to you, Ranim. Your academic work examines governance and knowledge production. Who gets to produce knowledge in one language? For whose institutions? And for which or what authority? In Gaza, in Sudan, in DRC, we're watching the systematic destruction of not just people, but also land, of universities, of archives, of research centers. And these are all entire infrastructure of knowledge. What are the long-term consequences for the communities who lose not just their present, but also the record of their past?
See, building on this discussion, it's also where the question of knowledge becomes critical, because what we've been describing in relation to land is part of a much broader pattern. I mean, when documentations by institutions, organizations like the UNESCO are documenting damage to schools and cultural institutions, it reflects more than just disruption. It reflects the weakening of entire knowledge infrastructures, as what we've just described as alternative. And now, in many ways, what we're seeing is what decolonization scholars call epistemicide, to add to the beautiful glossary Dr. Mazin just told us. Both informal institutions and land-based/informal knowledge systems, it can be understood as the erasure of a community's ability to produce and sustain its own knowledge. Now, the loss of land-based practices is not separate from this, because it's part of the same process where certain ways of knowledge or of knowing are marginalized and others are imposed or prioritized. The consequences to this become very clear. First, it reshapes how reality is understood. Knowledge becomes externally defined. And then it reshapes narrative, where histories can disappear, be rewritten, be unwritten. And practically it reshapes, again, reconstruction. Because what do you mean by reconstruction? I mean, rebuilding happening without local epistemology, meaning that this land is just taken as a lot of land. And if we keep treating this planet as if it's just lots of land, resources, no connection whatsoever, no life of its own, then we, again, threaten our entire livelihood as human beings on this earth. And this is where the field of decolonization becomes important, actually, because it pushes us to rethink reconstruction not as a top-down intervention, but as a bottom-up process grounded in local knowledge and lived experience. And here I want to note that if we talk about decolonization, it doesn't mean that we're standing steadily in face of this, opposing it, but we're trying to work with it, find more comprehensive patterns to it, and we're trying to fill this gap that has been marginalized for so long. And so this asks whose knowledge counts, who defines recovery, what systems are being reproduced in the process, when, how, where, by whom. And rebuilding knowledge systems is not just about reopening schools or institutions, it's about restoring this epistemic agency, a fight in academia that has been going on for a very long time, validating local knowledge systems and ensuring that communities shape their own futures. But because ultimately the long-term impact of epistemicide is not just the loss of knowledge, it's the loss of the ability to define this reality, identity, and possibility. And yet, with all these conditions, I just like to close with a pretty hopeful note. I mean, as people continue to practice, transmit, and protect the knowledge, whether through land, culture, education, memory, and that matters, because it means these systems are not entirely erased. As long as these practices continue, then reconstruction doesn't start from zero. Then it starts from what persists and what remains. And that persistence is precisely what makes more just, grounded, and locally driven futures possible.
Thank you, Ranim. I mean, what we're hearing from this panel is that the system we are describing currently operates on different levels. It destroys lands, it destroys people, it destroys our infrastructure. And we are seeing these systems, being destroyed in real life. And I think it's really important that we continue to actually name these systems that are actually causing all these havocs and destructions that are happening. So I really wanted to hear from our audience and quickly we'll just ask if anyone has any questions or have anything to share. You can just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you. Does anyone have anything to share or questions for our speakers? No question for our speakers? Okay. Yes, we have two people. Oh, we have doctor and we have so.
Thank you. Do you happen to work with the Israeli opposition? If there is one you can work with, do you have contacts with the colonizer? Thank you.
You want me to get this? Basically, what we have is an apartheid system. And yes, some Israelis are conscientious and they work with us. I was arrested over 12 times for doing civil disobedience. And half the times I was arrested with Israeli Jews who were standing with me in front of a 2,000-year-old olive tree that's about to be uprooted or houses that are about to be destroyed. We believe in joint struggle. We don't, like with South Africa under apartheid, we don't normalize, but we welcome joint struggle. We welcome Israeli Jews who are willing to shed their racism, shed the Zionist ideas, and join us in the struggle for freedom, for human rights. And as I said, I even had in our institute one Israeli Jew who volunteered with us for 2 years, living with us, working in our garden. So we welcome those kinds of joint struggles. We don't welcome, of course, any kind of normalization activities because, for example, I don't publish with Israeli scientists because their universities are built on stolen Palestinian land and stolen heritage and culture. So we have to be careful about what we do and how we do it, but we welcome joint struggle. One thing I forgot to mention, by the way, if anybody is interested, I wrote a book on popular resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment, in which I talk also about this kind of things. It's available in many languages. The French version of it is available here, and I'll have a book signing at 2:30 if anybody wants to buy it.
Thank you so much, Prof. Okay, so I will take just one more question. Okay, can we bring the mic?
Yeah, Chief, I want to ask you some few questions. Do you think that the world is in the position to solve these challenges? Climate issue, war, and what have you. Are we in a position to solve the problem? Because it looks like we keep on meeting, talking about war, talking about climate, talking about for years, and there are no solutions to it. What is happening? Thank you.
Actually, it's a very important question. It's exactly why we're here today. I believe each and every one of us has the power to actually do that change. And it just means that we need to open our eyes to what's beyond what we see in face of us. What we're trying to do is that we're trying to point each and every one of us into the direction where they can implement direct action onto the areas where they can actually do that. And it takes one small action collectively to move in one direction, but rather than be distorted and rather than being manipulated and confused by these political agendas, we just need to put one goal in front of us, and that is protecting this planet and making sure that humanity lives in peace and lives in dignity, in liberation of being who they truly need to be, rather than being fit to a certain model or frame. And so yes, we can actually, and we will, and it's on its way since we're talking about it here.
Yeah, thank you, thank you so much. I think what we have really, from my end, what I've really learned from this panel discussion is that, we have a simple truth. that we cannot talk about climate without talking about war. We can't talk about war without talking about colonialism. And we cannot talk about colonialism without talking about who controls the story. And for us to be able to solve the problem we are facing, we need to name that system fully, unapologetically, and demand transparency. And I think if we do that, then we can be able to see how we can solve all these issues that are actually connected. So thank you so much, Prof, for joining us. Thank you so much, Ranim, for joining us in this discussion. And we have our final speaker for today. We thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause for the amazing work that they're doing in Palestine.